You are listening to Steele Talkin, and I'm your host, Jearlyn Steele. Time to get started with another way to look at this whole thing with politics. It's all about talking politics within the walls of the job, whether it's your cubicle. You know, we used to say a long time ago, you know, when you were hanging around the water, what was it called, Dan?
The water cooler.
The water cooler. You know, the conversations around the water cooler got really heated sometimes, and people would say, they would take that out of the building and say, do you know what we talked about around the water cooler? I remember those days. Well, Dan Rust is joining us. He is founder and CEO of Frontline Learning, an international corporate training publisher. He writes and speaks, does keynotes all over, regularly in fact, about career-related issues, particularly skills and strategies to boost one's career trajectory. I want you to concentrate on that, to boost one's career trajectory. He's also the author of the book Workplace Poker, recently published by HarperCollins. Welcome to WCCO, Dan.
Hey, it's great to be here, Jearlyn.
Okay. Of course, we're all noticing that we're talking. Everyone's talking. We're talking whenever we get a chance, particularly on social media and in our private homes. But during the day, we're outside walking around with earbuds. We don't want to talk to people on the street. We don't want to talk to them on the train or the bus, or if you are sharing a car, you know, going to work. We just don't want to talk about it. And so as we see what's happening, we know that people are feeling very passionately on where they stand, and they bring it into the workplace to start talking politics. Where do you stand with that? What would you advise?
Well, you know, politics has always been a hot button issue, a hot button topic. And classically, you hear people say, man, you never talk politics or sex or religion at work. But with particularly the younger generation of workers, what we've seen change is they talk about everything to literally everyone. I mean, they're sharing areas of their lives that in the past might have been considered very intimate. They're posting these things on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Twitter. And I'm not here to judge that as positive or negative in any way. But my focus and the focus of the book, Workplace Poker, and the focus of my speeches and other work is career advancement, and is truly just honing in on what is either going to limit your career acceleration or what's going to increase your career acceleration. And when you think about things purely through that perspective, then that's where I come down on my advice in terms of what to share and not share in the workplace. And one of my strong recommendations is simply that as passionate as you might be and as right as you might be, as well-informed as you might be, let's just leave it at home. Let's just leave it in your personal life. Now, I would even maybe take it a step further to say, be very cautious when you post things on your social media, because once again, right or wrong, the moment you let the world know that you're a supporter of X, whatever X might be, whoever X might be, in the world we live in today, that automatically means this list of 12 or 15 things to most people. And the truth is, while you may be very, and I don't mean you, Jearlyn, I just mean in general, the listener might be very pro or anti one particular person, look at what the reality is. You've got 40% of America, love him or hate him, supporting Donald Trump. 40% of America, lover or hater, supporting Hillary Clinton. Another 20-ish%, either supporting Bernie Sanders or someone else, or being a bit agnostic at this point. So whatever your perspective may be, there are lots of other people who have a very impassioned, different perspective. And I think most employers would prefer that we come to work, we do the work that we are paid to do, we do it really well, and we put in extra effort, and we leave those issues alone that might in any way bring disharmony or disruption to the workplace. And even if it doesn't bring disharmony, the fact is you share certain things about your own opinions that other people sort of summarize down and make kind of a knee-jerk assessment of what that means about you. And it may be a career limiter.
You're taking us all the way back to the 80s, though, with this idea. You're taking us back to the 80s. And then we spent millions of dollars teaching the workforce to hug your neighbor. Remember the Covey seminars that we all had to take? We were taught, okay, don't be so stiff, don't be so quiet about who you are. Let's get to know one another. So here we are. Now you're asking us to erase all of that instead of being authentic. Now, you and I are a year
Embrace
apart.
diversity.
Embrace diversity.
Exist together.
Exactly.
I get it. I totally
But when you're
feel
talking
it.
about that whole politically correct being erased, how do we get back to that? I mean, well, now the cat is back out of the bag. People are feeling free to say whatever they want to say, and there's something beautiful about it, but it's not appropriate in certain situations.
And at a certain point in our lives, we learn that there is a distinction between the world the way we want it and the world the way it is. And the world that I think you and I want is that world where you can simply express who you are without any filters, and you embrace other people for what they are. But the world of work, the way it is, and I think it's probably the way it always will be, is that certain areas like politics are so charged that it does create barriers. And I've heard so many stories from people in the last couple of months, ever since the book was published. It was interesting to get feedback from a lot of people who shared with me their real stories. And it's not that you share an opinion in the workplace and then someone comes to you and says, hey, look, we flagged you as a Tea Party conservative.
It's an unspoken rule.
Yeah, it is simply that all of a sudden, over time, you see the trajectory shift.
But it has been time that has gotten us to this doorstep. And it's so unfair that we've taught people not to be that way. And now we're turning back the dial. And we turned it back so fast that now people have no time to be trained to do this all over again. I mean, you're writing about it, you're suggesting it, but we have really been through in these last decades, these 35, 40 years of dealing with this exact. And now we have our children whom we've taught to be authentic. You know, tell who you are, stand up for what you believe in. And now we're saying to them, well, if you want your career to move up, if you want that trajectory to be upward and moving, honey, you have got to keep your opinions to yourself.
I just spoke with a young lady a couple of days ago who is a sales rep. She's an outside sales rep. She travels the territory, and she's relatively young, in her mid-20s, and she has a sales manager who's also relatively young. And he was traveling with her. It was his first time traveling with her, and he got in her car as they were about to go on their route, and he noticed that her radio was turned to a talk radio station, and it happened to be a talk radio station with a perspective that was very different than his. And his immediate response was, turn that bleep off. And she turned it off, and she said that it took a while for her to notice, but his assessment of her and his whole perspective on her had shifted. Fair or not, doesn't really matter. She could just tell that suddenly he was seeing her differently than he had seen her
we're seeing
before.
those shifts happen all the time. Whether it's on the golf course or whether it's at the Christmas dance or the Christmas party at the company, where alcohol gives us freedom to say whatever we want to say. So eventually the truth is going to come out. That's what I'm saying, Dan. And if it's going to come out, don't you want them to be authentic and just say what they say? And it's how we say it, not necessarily what we say, but how we say it. Often that is the challenge.
I love the sentiment. I really do. And yet, when I wrote the book Workplace Poker, I interviewed hundreds upon hundreds of people who had achieved very high trajectory careers in difficult situations and difficult circumstances. And what I wanted to know from them was, just give me the reality. How did you do it? How did you play the game, so to speak?
And you believe that same game is being played today?
Without a doubt.
Because of the leaders that are leading us.
And the followers. I mean, let's be honest, millennials can be as judgmental as anybody else. I mean, it's not young or old. It is at every age. People have very firm perspectives, hardwired perspectives. And when they encounter someone whose perspective is different, oftentimes it quickly creates an assessment on their part that diminishes what they think of that other person. So in the workplace, again, if we're going to focus on what's going to help me achieve a high trajectory career,
don't talk politics.
It may be a small thing, and there are so many other things to talk about. I mean, there are amazing things to talk about
but
beyond.
Politics, religion, finances break up a relationship.
Oh, they're juicy.
They're absolutely. Hey, come on down.
Yeah, I know.
You're going to sit at the table with the conversation that's going on. I hope. If people are going to walk away and say, ooh, I don't even want to be a part of this, because if I am, my trajectory changes.
I love a juicy conversation about as much as anybody. I
but
really
really
do. But at work, I never share a critical comment about someone else. And I know that's hard. I mean, that's hard to hold yourself to the standard of you don't criticize other people. I don't talk about anything that I think someone else might have a different perspective, and we don't have the time to get into the nuance. I think part of the challenge is if you or I and someone else, if we had a couple of hours to sit down and really talk through a particular issue, we probably would come to a point where we understood we weren't really that far apart. And even where we are different, we appreciate why we're different. But those aren't the conversations we have.
So did you write this book because we're so polarized?
A small portion of that book is about the level of polarization and how we manage the politics of that. The rest of the book is all about everything that it takes to manage politics in the workplace, relationships in the workplace, more, right. Everything else.
In order to have a successful career.
Exactly.
Now, the name of the book is called Workplace Poker. Are you playing the game or just getting played? Interesting subtitle, by the way. There's a lot in that. We could do a whole show just on that subtitle alone. Let me ask you about relationships that are within the walls of the company and outside of the walls of the company. Let's take, for example, Ivanka Trump and Chelsea Clinton, who are besties. I mean, really, they are like best friends. They have both come forward and said, no matter who wins this election, no matter how dirty and down it gets, we are still going to remain friends. Some people are very surprised at that. They say, how in the world can this happen? But they're standing their ground and making this happen. So say if Ivanka is talking to her father and she wants to know, well, what did Chelsea tell you today? That's still in the workplace. She's in her father's company in the workplace. If it's Chelsea, it's a graying of that relationship, and you've got these foes that are fighting one another. That's one of the that's an example of kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah, I would just say, let's be careful about using Ivanka and Chelsea as an example, except for those listeners that you have who happen to be the children of billionaires and hyper, successful people. If you got those, yes, then you can follow the rules of Ivanka and Chelsea. For the rest of us, we may have to follow a slightly different set of rules. And also, I don't want to be too cynical, but I don't know how besties they really are. I think it's an image that serves both of them right now.
Well, no, they've really spent a lot of time together in the last years, and they come forward and say, no matter what happens, we are still going to remain best friends. So we'll see.
Good for them.
All right, we're going to take a break and come back, and I want to talk to you about politics as this big, huge, gigantic wedge issue. Every 4 years we go through this, and because we are polarized, I wonder what tools that you would give us to make conversations in the workplace easier, not necessarily cancel them out, because sometimes they are going to come up. So my guest, Dan Rust, is in studio. He is CEO of Frontline Learning, an international corporate training publisher. He writes and speaks regularly about career-related issues, particularly skills and strategies to boost one's career trajectory. And he's also the author of a new book called Workplace Poker, recently published by HarperCollins. And when was that released?
March of this year.
In March of this year. Is it going well?
So far, it's going great.
Oh, I love to hear
I'm
that.
here. That makes it great.
Hey, there you go. We were talking about politics being a wedge issue, and we know that it's going to come up when people are at lunch or in their cubicles and they hear someone talking on the phone. The conversation is going to come up. So what tools can you give us to either handle the conversation well, or to say we don't need to talk about this here?
I'll share with you, Jearlyn, the one skill that is the most difficult that I cover in the book, and I share a fair number of examples. The one that's most difficult for people to embrace and for people to master, but it's the skill of setting aside your judgment of other people. And particularly with politics, but with a lot of other things in the workplace, it's so easy to decide relatively quickly who the jerks are, who the good workers are, who the complainers are, who your friends are, who your enemies are, who you respect, who you don't respect, yada, yada, yada. And all of those judgments that we make of people, I get why we do it, and to some degree it helps us operate more effectively in the workplace, but those judgments also work against us. So just because someone shares a political opinion that is very different than yours, my recommendation in terms of the workplace would simply to be express non-judgmental curiosity about why they think that way. And it doesn't mean that you have to share your opinion or your perspective. I put much more energy into asking questions, and not gotcha questions like, oh, really? How could you think that way? Or, oh, really? Well, what about this? But truly seeking to understand what is it about her or him or that particular group or that particular position? Tell me more about your thinking. And simply focus on learning. And then that part of you that has this urge as you learn more about them, that part that has this urge to now tell you why you're wrong or tell you, well, now here's my opinion. Unless they ask, this is one of my big personal rules. Unless someone asks me for advice, I never share advice. Unless someone asks me my opinion, I never share my opinion.
And have you ever been an employee?
Oh, yes. I mean, most of my life, I've just been a working guy. So I tend to focus on the work at hand as opposed to, and I have very passionate political opinions, but I also
choose not to share them.
Compartmentalize
so
that.
You are a testimony to, or a
without a
testament
doubt.
to not using this type of language. Okay, then let me say this. In my humble opinion, I think that social media has given us a reason not to talk about it at work. Okay? And I'm sure that it's coming up, but social media, people wait till they get home and anonymity is a beast and you're able to say whatever you want to say and the vitriol comes out from your heart, your soul, every pore, and it pours out to everyone else who's encountering you on social media, right? But it hasn't stopped the conversation. Why is it necessary? Why do we have the need to want to hear it with our own ears, to look in the eyes of the person that is saying it, to really know that this is coming from them?
Well, to some degree, social media is the amplifier because our comments on social media tend to be brief. We tend to be more comfortable using language and a level of intensity that you might not use when you're face to face with somebody. But then suddenly, if you're reading a friend's tweet about what he thinks of Hillary, or he tweets one of those horrible photos of Hillary that's been photoshopped to make her look particularly bad, or they tweet a photo of Donald Trump with hair blowing in the wind or whatever. Those things might be amusing or funny to people who have the same perspective, but to people who have a different perspective, it's like yelling fire in a theater, and then it creates a natural desire to.
Are we that sensitive, really?
Oh, we are. Oh, come on. We are.
I don't.
Really?
Because from my perspective as an African-American woman, I've always had to vote holding my nose. For decades, I voted not for the candidate that I wanted because that person didn't exist. I voted for the lesser of the evils. Until 2008, I actually wanted to vote for Barack Obama, not because he was black. That was way down the list. It was because what he was saying, he was talking to me. It was my understanding of life. It was from my perspective. And I was like, wow, finally somebody understands what I'm feeling. So no, I've seen the cartoonish looks of different candidates that I voted for over the years. I've heard people complain and disagree with me completely, but I was able to freely share. If I was asked, I shared it. And sometimes when I wasn't asked, if someone was saying something at a table at lunch when I worked at Health Partners and if something came up, I would say, I disagree, but I'm curious to know, how did you get there?
There you go. And even in your tonality, there's this lack of judgment. It's more of, I think differently. Help me understand why you think the way that you think. But honest, Jearlyn, you are not representative of the vast majority of people. You have a level of understanding and passion, but maturity that goes along with that passion. We live in a world right now where someone puts up a billboard that says Black Olives Matter for an Italian restaurant, and suddenly they're getting hate mail because there is this assumption of a lack of respect that I don't think was intended. It was simply an attempt, maybe a ham-fisted attempt, but an attempt at humor from an Italian restaurant. And you see examples on the right as well where there's just this thin-skinnedness where people just go instantly hyperbolic when
But they've been given permission to do so. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
In the 80s, we were not given permission to do so. We were taught to have the conversations, but to know what to say,
Sure.
to make sure that we tolerated each other, we respected one another. And you're trying to take us back to that. And I'm saying that the cat is out of the bag, and I'm hoping that we can do it. I don't know if it's going to benefit us because I personally like it when I know where a person stands. It doesn't make me dislike them or hate them. I just like to know who you are. And I want you to know who I am.
Let me say then to all of your listeners, those of you who are listening and who work for Jearlyn, absolutely. That's fantastic because she's so incredibly open and mature.
You mean work with Jearlyn?
Work with and for Jearlyn. That's fantastic. Mm-hmm. And if you know
trust me, I work for Jearlyn.
Yeah, right. I do hire a few people, but no.
And for those who might work for, other personality types. Again, if you're managing your career, rather than wish the world was a certain way, I think you have to have the radar out to assess the world is a particular way. My particular workplace is a certain way. And there are people who make a conscious choice to work places that may not reflect their personal values, but the job itself brings either enough money or other value that they make those choices.
Very quickly, how far does the radar go?
I think it should.
How vast is it reaching? Because, there are certain companies and nonprofits that don't feel the same way. They want you to be yourself. They want you to have great conversations, but respect one another in doing so.
I would just say the majority of businesses in the world today want to make sure that you bring a mature, non-judgmental perspective to your interactions with employees. And however that's reflected in their particular values, make sure you understand that corporate culture and that what you do reflects that corporate culture, not the one that you want it to be, but the core culture that it actually is.
I'm so going to read your book, by the way.
There you go.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure having you in studio, Dan.
Workplacepoker.com is where anyone can go to get more information on it.
All right. We'll be back in just a moment.